Fewer readers, fewer ads, more charges of fake news. Journalism's in trouble and city dailies are hurting. But just maybe are journalists and communities figuring out new ways to provide the news? We'll hear from three longtime local media guys, all in new ventures. Brian Calle, formerly of the Orange County Register, now with LA Weekly. Gustavo Arellano, formerly of OC Weekly, now part-time with the LA Times and KCRW-FM. And Tom Johnson, formerly with the Daily Pilot, now with StuNews Newport, saving local journalism right now on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by...
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University is a proud sponsor of Inside OC and community programming.
Come on, cheerleaders.
All right.
Exactly.
Hi, I'm Rick Reiff, and I'm talking with three esteemed colleagues, Brian Calle, Gustavo Arellano, and Tom Johnson. Gentlemen, welcome for coming on.
Thanks.
I think we've got a few things to talk about when it comes to local journalism. And before we do anything else, though, Brian, let's start with you, because and we're going to talk about all the new ventures that you folks are in now. But you are now the publisher of LA Weekly, and you and a couple other buddies from Orange County bought this paper.
Not all from Orange County, but yes,
a few guys.
Yeah.
It was like the barbarians at the gate. There are people in Los Angeles who just went ape over the fact that the alternative paper in LA, which is right here, came under ownership of somebody like you, a conservative, Republican, on, and you can, make your defense on that. But here's some of the recent issues. It still looks like an alt paper to me. A lot of feature stuff, but that's what the alts are doing now, right? It used to be all exposés and stuff, and now it looks like more where to eat, celebrities, things like that. But anyways, tell us about it. What happened? What were some of the worst things? And are your reporters still being harassed when they go out on stories?
Not as much anymore, but that was the worst part. Reporters were being harassed, photographers were being harassed. Gustavo wrote about this in the Columbia Journalism Review, but it was insane, and a lot of what was being said about me and I think the ownership group and people inside the building was just patently not true. I think that, yes, I've been in Orange County for the last 10 years running editorial for the OC Register, but I also was born in Los Angeles County. I was educated in Los Angeles, both at USC and Cal State LA, and so for me it was a homecoming, and it was a way of kind of trying to figure out how to fix local journalism with an iconic brand, with a rich history.
And you're not even a hard right guy.
No, that was the funny part. Like, I'm very socially liberal and progressive, and then on economic issues I tend to lean right. I mean, I got criticism in Orange County from conservatives because I wasn't conservative enough, right? So for me, I've always thought of myself as someone who is in the center, and maybe I lean right a little bit, but that was kind of the absurd thing. It was kind of like this picture being painted of me that I was actually watching being painted, which wasn't really me. And so I think the proof is in the pudding, though. I mean, I think we're putting out awesome product. I think our editor-in-chief and creative director, Derek, is amazing. We've hired some really good editors in our various verticals. And I think that we're doing a good thing. And I think over time, people will see that there was no nefarious plan to kind of take over and turn the LA Weekly. It was really a genuine desire to make it into a sustainable organization.
Now, of course, when you came in, a lot of people lost their jobs, right? Most of the people got laid off, right? And so, like, how many people are working there now compared to when you first came in?
So that was one of the other funny things about the situation, was that the narrative was we fired everyone, that everyone in the editorial staff was fired, but we actually only did not hire into the new company 9 people, I think it was, in terms of editorial staff, and we've rehired, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but we've rehired a lot of those different positions. But the reality is, we're not the only newspaper in America that's downsizing or making cuts out of necessity. It's not like I've ever enjoyed having to let someone go, and over the years being someone in a newspaper, I've had to do that. I mean, for example, I had to let go one of my students at the OC Register like 4 or 5 years ago, and like I was distraught about it. It's never a pleasant thing, but you have to do what's right for the organization, and hopefully if we run the business properly, we can grow and hire even more journalists than we did before.
Yeah, now Gustavo, you took a very objective look at this thing. You wrote about this for Columbia Journalism Review, and for viewers out there that want to read about what went on at LA Weekly in much more depth than we can in this show, I highly recommend that they Google your article in Columbia Journalism Review. A gentleman named Daniel Hernandez, who wrote one in one of these kind of new news sites called LA Taco. Yeah. LA Taco wrote about it, and I thought both of you guys did really excellent jobs on that. But what's your take? It does seem to me some of this reaction from folks in LA, it was like, well, nobody wants this paper anymore. These guys come in, at least they're investing in the product, they're trying to make a go of it, and you're trying to run them out of business with advertiser boycotts and harassing reporters so they can't cover the news. And what was your take on the whole thing?
You can't blame them. They lost their jobs. He got rid of all of them, or he did not hire them. And I think and Brian actually admitted to this in the review, the dumbest thing he did was get rid of Dennis Romero, this workhorse of a reporter, just hard not news all the time. Like, you can't get rid of people like that. And I understand coming from the alt-weekly industry, we're in the slow death spiral. I mean, the reason I left my job was because they wanted me to lay off half the staff, and I refused. You have to be able to stand for some principles. So when those people started, the funniest thing, they were criticizing you because all the stuff that I used to write about you.
Yeah, they did. They did use some of that. Yes,
so I was fair to him. In the Columbia Journalism Review, what was interesting to me is like, okay, all this stuff is being thrown at Brian. A lot of it I thought was valid, but let's really get his side. And then, of course, for me, the conflicting emotion is that Derek Rainey used to be in charge of our creative side of the OC Weekly for years. I know Derek. Derek's a good guy. And if Derek and other people at LA Weekly, if they decided to stay after talking to Brian and after everything, then I thought to myself, okay, they must see some glimmer of hope here. Let's see what they have to say about that. So both sides, every side has their story. I still think Brian made a huge mistake in getting rid of a lot of those people, especially the way it was handled. And those people are never going to forgive them. And I hope you know that. Accept it.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, and that's the reality. But again, my attitude is you earn back people's trust, and if you put out and you sustain the weekly, then the proof is in the pudding. But I understand, like, people should.
How's the paper doing now? Because you made it very clear that you guys inherited a paper that was not doing well. And is it doing better now? Are you struggling? How would you describe what's going on?
It's most certainly more sustainable now, and it's definitely doing better, I think, with every print product or even digital property in the country, minus maybe a couple of the national sites. Like, you're going to have your challenges, and it's like this almost every day. But we're on a positive trajectory, but I still think there's a lot of innovation that needs to take place to make sure that it is thriving, not just sustaining itself for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And that's going to take a lot of work to get done. But right now, I'm really happy with the progress we made. I'm happy with where we're at. A lot more to do. But it's certainly better than the first month of being there.
Any plans to expand into Orange County?
Please no.
There are, we're looking at a couple of opportunities to do something cool that's not being done, I think, currently in Orange County. Not to give this guy too much credit because he's so mean to me all the time. But, I think that there is a void since he left the helm of the OC Weekly. And Orange County is thriving and growing, and it needs some different types of coverage, and so looking at opportunities. But I'm not going to break any news on your show, Rick.
Well, you've already kind of teased a little bit.
Seriously, I think I got to talk to some
one of the
people.
things that's interesting, 4 of us guys, there was a time when we all drew our paychecks from a big company, Business Journal, Register, Weekly, and LA Times. Daily Pilot / LA Times, and now we're all kind of just freelancing, winging things, and I think it's so. Tom, go ahead. You wanted to jump in.
I was going to jump in, because I just heard Gustavo a few minutes ago say, he left because the Weekly because he had to lay off. They wanted him to lay off half his staff. I go back to the Times. Every year it was the way, the Times managed their business is okay. It's time for layoffs. It's time for layoffs. And we were doing fairly well at the community news level, highly profitable and everything like that. And I remember the first time they called me up and they said, "We want you to share some of the pain." And so they gave me 2 people that they wanted me to terminate. And it would absolutely make no difference to the operation. They wouldn't even be a rounding off number to the Times. And it got to the point of being so ridiculous of laying off people that's when I realized it was time for me to leave, do something else.
Wow. And Gustavo, we said you're working with the LA Times, but you're a part-timer. You basically do one column a week for them. You've got your gig, great radio show on KCRW.
Thank you.
But I mean, you're not getting paid the same amount you used to, right?
No, of course not. First of all, I never got paid much to begin with. So right now, for me, what has always mattered is editorial independence. I'm more than happy to be a mercenary for people. Hey, you want me to shoot someone, journalistically speaking? I'll do it for you. Give me the right price and I'll do it. In terms of making something...
Charge a lot if you're going to come after me.
You'll do it for free.
Yeah, you should do the price I got for you. But for me, it's always been about telling the stories that I want. And there's with LA Times, I like doing it. For me, it was a challenge, cover the whole state of California, a column that comes out every Wednesday. I like doing that. But sometimes I just feel like Magneto in the X-Men. You're just like in this cage, just waiting to see when you could put out all your powers and just wreak havoc on whatever you want to cover. That's where I'm at right now. I'm stocking beers at my wife's store. That's my full-time job now.
It's actually your part-time job, right? But she does. She has a store, right?
She does.
And you help out. And you help out. And you have the time to help out.
Heaven knows I do nowadays. But I'll write honestly, I mean, it's been a great year for me. I've written for The New Yorker a couple of articles. I've written for the Columbia Journalism Review. That was a good one. I've written for arts websites. I've written for religion websites. I write for LA Taco. I'll literally write for whoever will have me if the rate is good. And that's one of the things I've learned.
Well, you told me what they pay at the LA Times. You got to start asking for more. That's all I could say.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, Tom, let's talk. In some ways, you're doing the most unique thing here. There's a news site that you're the co-owner and publisher of, right? StuNews Newport. And here's the front page from today. I get it every day, along with StuNews Laguna, which has its own publisher, right? And here's the headline: Police files: Woman allegedly burglarized multiple Bayside homes. People in Newport Beach want to know that. Newport man's $150,000 plus watch goes missing while he's on vacation. And then there's an article here: new hotel coming soon to the Newport Dunes property. And then one here, this almost smacks, this looks a little promotional, correct me if I'm wrong. Haircuts for a cause. Images Salon will donate 100% to child health. Okay, all right, okay, all right.
Such a cynic.
I think when you're doing local news, though.
Or is that okay what I said, how I said it?
It's
Maybe
great.
a little bit promotional there. But so tell us about how did this come about, and what are you doing, and what do you concede you really don't do that, let's say, the daily newspaper does or used to do?
Okay, so if you go back a few years ago, there was an online site, StuNews Laguna Beach, operating. It was profitable. It was doing very well in Laguna Beach. They continually called me after I left the Daily Pilot and said, hey, could we have a StuNews Newport? And I just kind of pushed them to the side and things like that. 2016, about June of 2016, the Daily Pilot, which I had been gone from for 8 years, had decided to make a fundamental change, and they changed their circulation area from, instead of covering Newport Beach and Costa Mesa, they added on Huntington Beach, Fountain Valley, Irvine, Laguna Beach, and they made it a more regional paper. So they weren't going to have the local coverage. So they did that on a Wednesday, and I opened up StuNews Newport profitable on the next day on Thursday.
Wow.
So that was the story.
And so these, how would you describe it? Is this going to take the place of the daily newspaper, or what?
I think that's up to the daily newspaper. See, one of the problems I see, the LA Times bought the Daily Pilot in 1993. I used to go to tons of meetings as the publisher in downtown Los Angeles. Every time the Los Angeles Times did a survey, people wanted more local news. But if you talk to the editorial department, and guys, I respect what you do and everything, talk to the editorial department, they were focused on winning Pulitzer Prizes and international awards and things like that. They wanted the big stories. So it was kind of a battle. I remember one of the top editors, who I think is in Washington, D.C. now, sat there one day at the Times Orange County and said, I didn't come here to work for the Orange County Times. So the focus on local has never been there. And I think they've I think they've left that alone. And I think the Daily Pilot did a good job with it for a number of years, but I think it's kind of floundering right
Interesting you should say that, because I think that with Sun Xiong, the billionaire, LA billionaire who has now bought the LA Times, it sounds to me like he kind of wants to keep going that route of winning Pulitzer Prizes and making the LA Times a truly national paper. Have you gotten any indication, Brian? And do you think he will also be investing in local news?
We'll see. I mean, there's a lot of theories about what he will and won't do. I mean, there's a lot of excitement. There's also, I think, a lot of trepidation because people are comparing him to Jeff Bezos, and I think that there's many things that Bezos has done well at the Washington Post, other things that he hasn't, and you're seeing some of that come to fruition in news stories just in the last couple of weeks about wage disputes within the company, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll be really interesting. I mean, the LA Times, like every paper, has its challenges, and you're going to have to address those challenges, and it'll be interesting to see how both the community and the employees of the company react to that. I mean, the biggest thing that they've done, which we were talking about before the show, is they've moved from their iconic offices in downtown to Los Angeles, where, by the way, the LA Weekly just moved into Los Angeles, not in their offices. They moved to El Segundo, right, which is a huge different shakeup for that company. So it'll be interesting to see what else is done and what he decides to do there, and frankly, how hands-on he will be, because that will be very telling in terms of how the relationship with both editorial staff, the other employees in the company, the community, and him actually operates.
Okay, so we've talked about Sun Xiong. You mentioned Jeff Bezos, the founder, boss of Amazon,
who bought
the Washington Post. And there's been much talk now about guys like this, guys and women like this, call them patrons of journalism. That's a term that I'm borrowing from my colleague at the Business Journal, Richard Reisman. But there's been a lot of talk about this. And the Register, in fact, not too long ago, back in April, had an extraordinary editorial section where they devoted their Sunday section, they, along with all the other papers in Digital First, their media group, basically telling people, almost like with their hat out, please help us, please save us, and making comments about how the old model of journalism, let's call it a for-profit model, isn't working anymore for daily newspapers. It was kind of it was something I've been saying for a while, and maybe you guys have too, but for the paper to come out and just admit we can't do it anymore, and they brought up this idea of the patrons of the community, of a nonprofit group. Either you have a very rich person or you have a community group that comes together and is going to support a newspaper just like you support the opera, the theater group, whatever. I see you shaking your head.
I'm laughing. R.C. Hoyles must be rolling in his grave right now. Like the Register, but this is where we are in daily journalism, and a lot of journalism, it's a charity case now. Very few people can make any profits off of it. The OC Weekly, we're very profitable until, and beware, when we talked the last time I was on your show, beware the rich Uncle Pennybags with good intentions who come in and say, I'm going to save you, and then starts tinkering, starts killing the goose that laid the golden egg. So all these, with the Register, what's happened to them is tragic. They still do some good stories, but you talk about local news. When I used to read the Register, I lived for all the local news, the small little things. So just reading the headlines for StuNews, I'm not from Newport, but those stories interest me, like $150,000 watch missing. That tells you something about Newport. Like, I want to know the stories in Santa Ana, but now all the Register, there's like no local coverage of politics anymore. It's completely gone. I don't know what they're making Martin Wiskell do or anything like that. And people do want that local news. And I think with someone like Sun Xiong, I'm not going to speak, I'm not representing the Times officially or whatever, but he does want prestige, but he also understands that the reason why so many people stopped reading the dailies was because they're no longer telling stories that matter. Like, Pulitzers are great and all, but what matters are stories that people are going to relate to. People want to know who are the people that we should be angry about locally and nationally, and who are the people who we should be supporting.
So it's interesting. Tom mentioned how he felt the LA Times, and I agree with him, was pulling away from Orange County coverage. You would think the Orange County Register would just double down and do more. What I'm hearing is that they're doing less. I mean, as the former Register guy, how do you feel about that?
I live in Los Angeles now. So I'm not reading the OC Register, and I'm not going to speak ill of my old company, and I have a great deal of admiration and respect for everyone who's there. I do think, in this age of journalism, especially when you have an organization where you have to remember that the OC Register is only one property in the Southern California News Group, which is 11 properties total. So they're focusing on content that is interesting to all of those properties. Is that a good thing for Orange County? No, probably not. How you fix it is a whole different story. And so, I mean, even when I was there and I got to the Register, I think in late 2008 or mid 2009, we were in a situation where you saw cut after cut, and every year you'd have less and less coverage. And so possibly the only way that you're going to save that is through a nonprofit model, but you also have to have people in the community willing to support that long term. I think that an interesting test case in this is Norberto Santana, who runs the Voice of OC.
Yep.
And I think he would tell you if he were here, and I don't want to speak for him, that it becomes challenging when you have individual donors, because as soon as you go after them or one of their friends, what happens to the relationship with that particular donor? So if done, it has to be done
Yes, and that's
properly.
always brought up. But you know, people will support a theater group and they'll go to a play and they won't like the nudity, or they won't like that it's an anti-business play or whatever. But you know what? They understand that they're supporting the community. It's a worthwhile pursuit. And I think that's a sales job, if you will, that a good publisher can do to let these people know, yes, you're donating to something that will occasionally write a story that you don't like. And you just live with it, or you live with that donor pulling out and not supporting you, just like an advertiser can if they don't like a story. So I think that's something that they can overcome. And I don't want to talk ill of the Register either, because I think they still have some great reporters there. They're doing good stuff. They're a media partner of this show and all that. But I've got to ask a question, and I'll start with you, Tom. Will the Orange County Register exist 10 years from now?
Certainly, to me, not in its current form. I mean, I think they have to make a lot of changes. What I've noticed more about the Register more recently is it's seems like a more plug and play opportunity where, if you want to find the 10 best pizzas in Orange County, there's a spot for that on the front page and things like that. And some of that stuff is good, but it's more magazine-y. I really think, if you look at newspapers and you look at somebody like the Register, so what happens is, in the old days when newspapers were flourishing, they're owned by local ownership groups. That's the problem we have today, is all these companies came in, back in the 90s and looked at newspapers and said, boy, these are making 30+% profit. We can come in, tweak these a little, and get more money out of them. And they came in at the time where the industry was starting to crash too. And they started pinching it together. They had no love for the communities they're in. I mean, I credit you. I think it's great you went back to LA. You grew up there, you're invested in LA, you should have an office there. That's what media should have. But when you have ownership across the country, when the Tribune Company out of Chicago brought the LA Times, it was the worst thing that happened.
But really, Brian just wanted to make a conservative takeover of
course.
Just joking.
That's true.
Just joking. Okay, Gustavo, how do you feel 10 years from
They
now?
need to be bought by someone local. And this is what drives me kind of crazy, because let's not forget, just a couple of years ago, the Register was in an auction, a bankruptcy auction, and the two people who were local, the only local millionaire that was trying to bid for it was Mike Cara, who currently owns the former Orange County Register
Where
building.
we sit right now in this studio. We're the only thing going in this, the stadium of KDOC is the only thing going in this building.
And where was the Don Brenns? Where was the Henry Nicholases? Where was the George Ardroses? Where was all these millionaires? Jim Doty from Chapman University at the very end tried to make a bid for it, and nothing happened. So frankly, that's what the Register needs, but I don't know if Orange County even cares enough, which really speaks about how shallow Orange County is, that we don't think news is important.
Wait a second, but isn't it possible, as I said, we got StuNews, you got LA Taco, you've got Voice of OC, and that's something, Brian, let me test you. Is it just that, hey, daily newspapers, a lot of print publications are just the horse and buggy, and there's a new way for people to get their information, and that we've just got to get with it, and that it's not that journalism is dying, it's just that this vehicle is dying.
I'm not willing to give up on them just yet. I think that the Register in some form will exist in 10 years, as I do with most of these brands. I think that the strength is in the respect and admiration towards the brand. The challenge is that these brands have been damaged because of national conversations, the profession of journalism has been damaged. I think it was 61%, according to both a Pew survey and a Gallup poll survey, said that 61% of people don't trust their local news
and
sources.
let's talk, because we have less than a minute, and let's get your opinion first, Gustavo, on that. I guess you could say that, Donald Trump's ginning it up. People have always criticized the media, sometimes unfairly. But haven't there been a lot of self-inflicted wounds? Isn't there some truth when 60% of the American people say, they don't trust newspapers? Isn't maybe we've done something to...
We've been too liberal? No, we just say
No,
the
no,
truth.
I'm not
People
saying-
have
not
never
saying
liked the
we've been
truth. And look,
So you're just defiant. No, it's not our fault.
No,
Okay.
it's always been our fault. I personally think the problem
5
was
seconds.
We should all be muckrakers. We should all be yellow journalists and follow my newsletter, Gustavo Arellano's Weekly. There you go.
All right, okay, that's the last plug. Very good. Gentlemen, thanks so much. And we'll continue. We'll talk a little more for our open mic segment. Okay, and that's it for now. Thanks again to my guests, Brian Calle, Gustavo Muckraker Arellano, and Tom Johnson. You can watch this show and past shows at pbssocal.org or rickreif.com. You can also catch our shows and our post-show open mic chatter on YouTube, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by...
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
All your life, people talk about what's best for you. But to most people, it's just that. Talk. Unless you're with Memorial Care, a healthcare system devoted to one important thing: what's best for you.